Thank you, John. Good to be here with you this morning. First thing I look around and see where the clock is in this place. Okay, that's good. So always work with the clock, you know. Keeps the audience happier by the time we get done. So we're going to be more than an audience, I hope, today. We're going to interact with each other a little bit so you can kind of get yourself ready for that as we're going forward. But as John mentioned, I'm very interested in change or transformation. So one of the things that has happened to me as a counselor is I've watched lots of people over the years and noticed that some people successfully make a change into being a better person than they were before, and then there's others that don't. And so my life has sort of been looking at what does it take to really change our character. And the people that I end up talking with most of the time, the people that are interested in the things that I write, are people that think that Christianity should actually be working better than what they've seen. We've tried a lot of things, and over the years, we notice that we haven't changed as much as it seems like we should have changed. We're too much like everybody else around us, and we haven't really overcome the issues that we're looking at. And there's a couple of things in there that I'd like to pay attention to today, because typically in a North American church, North American Christian context, there's this idea that it's me and God. And so if I need to make any change, well, God and I'll work this out, and then I go kind of hang around with all the other people who kind of encourage me to work things out with God. But there's an odd thing about the human brain, and I'm a neurotheologian by training, which means that half of my study is on how the brain works, and half of the other study is how God works. And the idea in my mind is that if God understands people at all, what he teaches should fit with how the brain works. And if they don't go together, I go back and look at it again, because I probably have misunderstood how God's working. And so this is one of the things that you read as you go all the way through. You ever read the book of Numbers? Yeah, okay. Why do you suppose that Numbers is longer than the whole creation story? Yeah, because God doesn't waste pages on something unless he's very, very interested in creating a people. Because actually a people is not a neutral thing. A people has an effect on us. In fact, have you ever found yourself not doing something you really wanted to do because of the people around you? Like passing gas or anything like that. I mean, there's lots of things that we don't do because of the people around us. And sometimes the people around us are the people that are in our heads. So that, you know, when we think of the people that we value, there's things that change about the ways that we act, because the people have an impact on us. And matter of fact, almost everything having to do with character is directly linked in your brain to your people. So my people determine my character much more so than my private thoughts. In fact, most of my own decisions, if you looked at the brain like a tree, your decisions are like the leaves at the top. They're the easiest thing to change, and every little breeze blows them around. You ever decide to do something and like you're going to work out more, or you're going to cut back on sugar, or you knew everything you knew to make a decision, but you know the breeze blew, and so the next morning you had as much sugar as you did the day before? Because even though it's easy to make a decision, it doesn't really go very deep in our character. Whereas relationships are much more like the roots of that tree, and they hold things in place so that we're very affected by that. So what I'm going to talk about today is another little detail about the brain, and that is that when you're born, every human brain is born predator. So right now, a lot of men around the world are getting in trouble for their predatory ways with the Me Too movement and all that sort of stuff that just suicide over in Korea yesterday, I think, over somebody who got caught being a predator. And all of us have had our struggle with our inner predator. And so what I want to talk about here is, how does a man make a transition from a predator to a protector? And to just put that in context, we're all born predator, and it's hardwired into your brain. So if something is hardwired into your brain, can we get rid of it? Not by any means we want to follow. No, you would have to carve pieces out of your brain, and I don't think anybody wants that procedure. So if we're all hardwired for predator, one of the things that we waste a huge amount of time on in character change is trying to get rid of something that's in the wiring. It won't go away. The thing about predator, which just to have you think about it a little bit, is predators always notice weakness. You get a wolf, he's outside looking for his prey. He's looking around for the weakest member of the herd, right? He's looking for any sign of weakness. And if you go back to grade school, I think most of us were there, no one had to point out who had a weakness. You didn't have weakness noticing classes. We always knew who was the worst speller, who was the worst runner. We knew who had the worst fingernails. I mean, you name it, any weakness that anybody had, no one had to teach you how to notice that, because the brain just simply picks up on it. It's wired in. Now, you can't make your brain stop noticing weaknesses. But what you can do, you have two choices, and this is the thing that changes you from predator to protector, and that is, when a predator sees a weakness, he says, "You're my lunch. I'm going to take advantage of that weakness to your detriment," right? A protector sees the same weakness, but he says, "I'm going to help you. I'm going to cover that weakness in some way. I'm going to make sure that vulnerability doesn't get the best of you." So when we see someone trip, we think, we could get his wallet, or do we think, let me grab your arm so that you don't fall so hard? See, there are two responses. Both notice the weakness. You can't not notice someone trip. It's what comes next in your mind that is what we would call character. And so if we're going to realize we're all wired to notice a weakness every time we see it, what we have to learn is, how do you become protective when you see a weakness? And that's actually a character that we learn from others. So we're going to look at a biblical story along these lines. Let's look at David and Nabal in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and about verses 10 to 25 if you want to go look it up. And I'll read a little bit about it, but some of you may have heard the story before. And David's been run out of the country by Saul, who's the king, who's a major predatory figure, doesn't know how to protect people. David is, by the way, his son-in-law. So there's the family aspect to all of this, and so he's being chased. And while he's out in the wilderness, he and his men have been protecting the herds of this fellow named Nabal, making sure that no predators got into there. And so it came time for the shearing and all of the other things you do when you're, basically, if you're a herder, this is the time when you turn it into cash. And so David and his men show up and say, "We've been offering you protection for a while. Can we be part of the festivities?" And Nabal tells him where he can go and what he can do when he gets there. And so that's where our story starts out here. So one of the young men, being one of Nabal's servants, ran and told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them and went off on them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall both at night and at day. All the time we were with them, keeping the sheep. So what kind of a character do we see here with David? He's protector, and to be a good protector, you have to actually have a pretty good idea what a predator would do, right? So you actually, the best cops think exactly like the crooks, but when it all gets said and done, they would rather have a different response. That's the only difference. If you can't really think like a crook, you'll never make a good cop, right? You'll never catch anybody. But you have to have a different response to what you want to do when you recognize the weakness in the system. So there's very little difference between security guys and hackers, right? They're both hacking the system the same way. It's just that when you find the weakness, you have a different response you prefer to take when you see it there, right? So what we're looking at is that David is a very good protector, means his predator brain is fully on. He's tracking everything a predator would do, but he has something he would prefer to do in response. So at least that's how it's been so far. So then let's go back to the servant. He says, "Now therefore, know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against his entire household. For he is such a scoundrel," literally a son of worthlessness, "that no one can speak to him." So David is now mad because he got turned away from the feast, and he's going to come and kill everybody. So what has happened to David's identity? He's made a hard switch from protector to predator. He's gone into full-on predator mode right now. Now, it's always there, right? Every time you look at things, David knows more than anybody else how to wipe out this whole place because he's been keeping an eye on them for a while. And what we need to notice is that we would like to think that maybe our predator had gone away. But our predators never go away. It's hardwired into your brain. All of us have the tendency from time to time to flip into hardcore predator mode when something happens to really insult us. And in fact, in this case, when we meet a full-on ungrateful idiot, which you can do while driving or almost any place, it's real easy for our brain to switch into predator mode. So David, in this particular case, if we read more of the story, you would find that Abigail decides that she's going to go out and talk to David as he's on his way in to kill him, and remind him that in his heart he'd rather be a protector than a predator. And in fact, that switches the story around. So what we actually need is someone with the guts of Abigail to come to us when we're in our predator mode and go, "Hey, I know you're a predator. You could be a predator. You'd be a pretty good one, but wouldn't you rather be a protector right now?" And so it's the people around us that we need to have remind us during those times that there is another alternative. And really that's how we develop character. Now, David and Saul, his father-in-law, had another incident that just you can think about it along this line. When David was with his nephew, Abishai, so I'll read that story. So David and Abishai came to the people at night, and that's Saul and his people, where Saul lay sleeping within the camp with his spear stuck in the ground by his head, and Abner and all the people, Abner's his main general, and all people laying around with him. And Abishai said to David, "God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, please, let me strike him once with a spear, right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time." So here we find we've discovered a weakness, right? We figured out how to get into the enemy's camp. We figured out how to find the king. We found right exactly where it is. We got a weakness we're looking at. And when, these are good military men, you have to find your weaknesses and do something with them. Now the question is, when you come to this moment of encountering the king, will the predator or the protector win? And so we've got this dialogue that comes out between the two of them. And David says, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be without guilt? The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Now please, take the spear that has his head and the jug of water, and let's go. So this time David remembers that he is a protector, not a predator. So he isn't here to kill the king. He's here to tell the king, you don't have to try to kill me. I'm not out to get you. So I am actually your protector if you would let me. And you don't actually give that message across by killing the king. Right? But Abishai has a long history of letting the predator in him win. And that if you read the story of David, you'd find these things all across the way. Now, how do you first start learning about this? Well, it's actually between 12 months of age and 18 months of age. So you start learning how to be a protector very early on, you're about 1 year old, and it's developed according to the bond with your father. The bond that you develop with your mother is the strongest aspect of deciding who am I for the first year of life. And it's what teaches you how to deal with all the things that require nurturing and caring for yourself. But all of us about 18 months of age or so start getting into what you call the terrible twos, right? That's when your anger systems start developing. And you need somebody who's going to show you not just what to do when you need to eat, but what are you going to do when you're angry and you're upset and you're charged full of a lot of energy that could be very destructive. And that's the bond with your father that develops that is central to regulating fear and aggression. This is what helps us move from predator to protector. If when we're feeling afraid or angry, we're taught, you know what we do when we're afraid or angry? We move into our protector. You have to learn that the same way you would learn to talk, the same way you would learn anything else. Have any of you been to the Netherlands? Yeah, a couple of you probably flew into Schiphol, the airport there near Amsterdam. Flew into Schiphol. Of course, I'm tired from being up all night. And I went to the urinal, and there was a fly on the urinal. Any of you remember the fly on the urinal in Schiphol? Yeah, you see it there. What they discovered, yeah, you wonder if I've taken loss of my senses here. I'm off on the urinal in Schiphol, but these are basic things for us men we have to think about. Now, they discovered that if you put a little fly design on the urinal, the amount of spilled urine on the floor dropped by 70%. Because guys would look at that fly and pee on it. Brilliant, right? Now, okay, so let's take you back to, 1 year to 18 months of age. You're typically being toilet trained right in that time, right? Now, suppose that the people around you just got on your case every time you peed your pants or did anything. No one bothered to tell you where the toilet was or how to use it. What would we end up developing for skill on how to deal with this basic function if no one taught us this is how men do it? And I've heard a lot of young mothers say, it's time to take that boy to the bathroom and show him how the men do it, right? This is the same sort of very basic thing. If you leave your anger and aggression with no models of how do we turn this into something protective, people will end up making a mess of things every time they feel the urge because no one has taught them a better way. See? So, I'll just throw in one more story here while we're at it. Now, Cotton Mather, the great Puritan leader, had stopped and, as he writes, as I pisseth against the wall, because this is Old English, a dog came and lifted his leg next to me, and I said to myself, here I am reduced to the level of a dog. From now on, as I pisseth against the wall, I shall think high and lofty thoughts. Now, it's really kind of the same with our anger and our predator instincts. You can't make them go away. You will have to stop and deal with them. But you're either going to have high and lofty thoughts, you're going to have extra, here's what we like to do when we're in this condition that you have learned from other men, or you're going to be left with what the dog knows. And that's really what has happened to most of us when it comes to dealing with our predator self. We really don't hear an awful lot when we go to church about how do we live with our predators. It's almost like when we get here, people expect that because we're somehow Christians, it will have gone away if you're properly pious. If you're well enough connected with God, all of this stuff disappears from your head. It doesn't. It's wired in. What you need to do is learn from your other people. So the transition from predator to protector hinges on how our man pack deals with weakness. I'm going to call it a man pack because it's whatever, the pack of men that we run around with. And realizing this starts at 12 months of age means that, our man pack is developing very early on in life. So this very important bond will teach us what it is that what we do when we see weakness. Because that's what we will always notice, the weakness. Now the question is, what do we do about it? Make sense? Right? So for instance, if you're one of those rare men that's attracted to breasts, yeah, you will notice when there's a chance of their being exposed. No one has to notify you. You don't have to be trained on how to do this. There's no classes in college on how to notice the opportunity coming up for this sort of exposure. It's a weakness, a vulnerability that our brain will always notice. Now the question is, what do we do when we get there? What did your man pack teach you about it? And there's certain men pack that is built around being the best predator, and they will brag on what they did in order to take advantage of this opportunity. And those guys talk with each other. But the protector guys, have you ever heard a good conversation among protector men about the best thing to do when an opportunity to gaze upon breasts might be coming your way? And I really, I have 50, 60 years in the church. I'm still waiting for my first conversation. You see, my man pack has taught me almost nothing about it other than I shouldn't notice. I'm sorry, noticing is wired into the brain. It isn't going away. No amount of prayer, fasting, or anything else has made it go away. So the thing that ends up happening is I end up feeling like, well, I must be a terrible Christian then. Because for 40 years I've been praying for this to go away. And only when I got so old that I lost all my testosterone did I even start to faintly feel that way. But even that wasn't so reassuring of a good Christian, was it now? No. Yeah. Does this strike you, at least at some level, like this is an unusual conversation to be having in church? Say, no? Yeah, it's the best place to have it. But it doesn't happen a lot because as a man pack, we're not really often helping each other. And so that's one of the things that's good about these moments. So when we use our weakness, so I've got a weakness. I don't know what to do with my reactions. And the two typical reactions are, what do I do about sexuality and what do I do about anger? So when I have a really angry reaction and I know I didn't handle it well, do I have that urge to run to church and tell people about it? About how badly I handled that, because I got a real weakness here. I don't know what to do with that. See, we had a man pack that had our back, that looked at weakness and said, all of us have a weakness in this area. We come wired with not knowing how to deal with our predator self. And so the fact that you have a predatory reaction when you get angry should surprise absolutely nobody in the world. I mean, everybody's got that wired in. So that part's not a surprise. What you really need to do is come down here, because we're a bunch of guys learning how to deal with those angry reactions. So when you get here, we're going to turn to you and go, wow, you brought that to the right place. Here's where we look at those kind of things. I have your back when you forget who you are, and like David, you turn predatory and you're going to wipe out the whole house. Right? So if we had that kind of a reaction to weakness, now it's, it's sort of the no soldier left behind kind of thing. You look at the weakness and go, I'm not going to let that get you. Right? So you've never learned what to do with this predatory response. I can't leave you behind. I can't let that get you. Even if I don't know what to do with it, let's go back to a group identity, a man pack, somebody who is working on how do you do something protective when you have this reaction. How do you do something protective when people cut you off on the road? Well, examples are few. Discussions are fewer. Right? So, I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, gave me a good chance to work on some of these issues. And someone suggested to me that suppose that I put in my mind that I was a shepherd on the freeways. And so as I passed cars and interacted with anybody, I tried to raise their joy level, let them know that at least someone was glad to see them that morning. And that when somebody needed a space, I would be one of the people making sure that they had a space and thanking anybody else who had a space. When my mind began to go in that direction, actually my reactions began to shift. I still noticed when I got cut off, but I now had a different growing set of what could I do. Up until then, it was actually just after Star Wars had come out. Some of you are old enough to remember when that first arrived and stuff. Yeah, and they had these wonderful blasters, right? And as I was driving down the freeway, I'd imagine having a blaster on my steering wheel, like, there goes that. And so I had the full-on blaster type approach to driving. This fully Predator. I pick out their weakness and boom, yeah, right. And then I'd just be depressed because I didn't actually have a button, But when I decided that maybe, at church they thought of me as a shepherd, right? What if I actually was one enough that when I was on the freeways I was still a shepherd? My mind began to develop options I hadn't thought of before. Same thing happened in the airports. I go there, a lot of annoying things happen in airports. But one of the things that I do, even on the airplane, is I make sure that whenever the flight attendants are going up and down the aisle, I do something to smile and make their day better so that they will be better able to cope with all the stuff going on around, because I can see the weaknesses happening. I can see who the annoying people are. I can see when the flight attendants are getting ready to lose it and, that sort of thing. So my response, again, is I notice all the weaknesses. And you do too. Your brain always notices the weaknesses. What we've got is a shortage of helpful things to do as a result of them. And if we begin to talk about those with other people, we actually, our creativity and even our spiritual life begins to inform that, because we can say to God, I have no idea what to do with this. So, for instance, my parents, absolutely no example of how to handle anger well. I mean, I can't point back at any example. My dad's way of doing it was try to suppress it as hard as you can and not let anybody know that you're mad. Which worked most of the time, but every once in a while it didn't, and that was spectacular. And my mother was one who would lose it quite regularly, and so one of our family rules was don't upset your mother. And we worked really, really, really hard as a family to make sure we didn't upset her mother, because once that happened, it was going to be ugly for a little while running right there. So no good examples, and I had no idea what to do. What would be a good protective response when you're angry? Does that make your brain rattle around in an empty hole? What are the good protective responses? What would I do when I was angry? Now we're going back to that little fly on the urinal. What would I focus on? What would I pick? And I go, if I did this, I hope God tapes it and plays it later. Right? Because most of the time, if I thought, I know he taped that, and one day he's gonna ask me about that, and I'm gonna be so embarrassed. But what would it take to do something when I was angry that I would look back at and go, wow, that was good. I hope they got that on tape. So I had no one to talk about this with. No one in my church wanted to talk about it, so I started talking about it with the checkers in the grocery line. I noticed they were totally bored. They're checking things, the scanners had come in and all that sort of stuff. Some of you don't know, but back then the barcodes had just been put on products, and everyone was quite sure it was the sign of the beast, and that we were all we were all at the end of the world right there, and the grocers were just like, this is boring now. So, going back to that place and time, I would say to them, what do you like to do when you're angry that you feel proud about? And they would look up at me like, oh, someone's talking to me. And they would give me their ideas, all of which were terrible. But as I walked out to my car, I would say to myself, now why do I think that idea is so terrible? And by just kind of reverse engineering it, I'd go, oh, because I would rather this. There's a thought I hadn't had before. So it's interesting, even if you're talking about it and the people are giving you bad ideas, it creates this creativity within us to go, well, why is that a bad idea? So it's not because if you get together with a man pack that we're all going to have these excellent ideas, especially not to start. But we are in a place where people talk about it and they think intelligently about what would be a protective response instead of just getting on our case because we had a predatory one. And this is the thing that we need to change. Because you put that and you put God's Spirit in the middle of that mix and you'll come up with some ideas that are considerably more brilliant than you thought might have come out of that group. And this is where you combine the two factors together. So if we only use our weaknesses as a way to win, we stay predatory. Martha Stout from Harvard Medical School, the author of The Sociopath Next Door. Also, the other one is called Sharks in Suits. No, Snakes in Suits, right? Snakes in Suits. It's about sociopaths in business. And about 15%, mostly near the top or leadership end of businesses, tend to be quite demonstrably sociopathic. Sociopathic at its core means I win, I don't care what happens to you. And so she says, Martha Stout says, if you take loving kindness out of the human brain, there's not much left except the desire to win. So really what we're talking about in terms of protector is how do we put loving kindness back into our minds? So what we do is both loving and kind, and not simply a matter of winning. Because if you take that out, my winning, and you might notice that this is the case, shows up rather commonly in politics. My winning is primarily you lose. Because you would have to ask yourself the question, why is it that we work so hard to make the other person lose when in fact what they might have wanted to do was better than nothing? And so these playoffs where all I'm trying to do is make you lose feels like a win to me because I have a sociopathic mind. That's a predator. If you're the one dead at the end of this encounter, not me, a predator wins. Right? You may have gotten very little else out of it. And so we would think of it sometimes, you go, what on earth are they thinking? Because no one won. You know, we stopped everything. Now we don't have a budget for the year. You know, all the national parks have been closed down because both sides were in predatory mode, and all they wanted to do was make sure the other side lost. Right? You've seen this before? You get that in your own mind every once in a while? See, when we get into predator mode, what we do with our families and the people around us is mostly make sure they lose. And when you think about it, did we really win very much on the other side? No, because everyone's mad at us now. Right? What we did when we were angry didn't actually protect anybody. And anger is actually designed in your brain to be a protective emotion. You know, that hard as that might be to believe with the family that I came out of. Anger is there. Anger and fear are so closely related chemically that you almost can't tell the difference. The difference between fear is there's a threat and I have to get away. All right? So if a lion was running along this way, I tend to go into feel more like prey than predator right then. I'm going to be out of here, right? Unless a lion is running into my house where my family is, and now the lion, I can't run away from it, that lion has to be stopped. Now I go into anger mode. And now I'm ready to tear that lion apart because he has to be stopped. You can't come in here. I can't run away from you. So whenever you get angry, you can be quite sure there's some threat that needs to be stopped. The only problem is, most of the time, the threat is to our dignity. So notice that? Someone's disrespectful to you. It makes you mad. So what do you do when you get mad because someone disrespects you? Does it restore your dignity? Or does it just make you look like the biggest idiot as the one that you just came up against? You see? And the problem is, without ever having anyone show you the little fly that you're trying to hit, you will end up doing something just as dumb as the person across from you, because that's now your group. You're taking your reference from them. You're going, I can be better than you at this, and you're going to lose instead of me. See the predator thinking there? Instead of saying, oh, you know what? You've just threatened my dignity. You've treated me like I'm a complete idiot. What would be a good way to stop that threat? Well, I do believe not acting like a complete idiot would be part of it. Right? It's an obvious thought when you think about it, but at the moment, you're just looking at it, and it's now predator on predator, not predator on protector. So I'm going to protect my dignity under these conditions. You've just been very disrespectful to me. I will show you how a person who should be respected will act under these conditions. That would be protective. You'd walk out of that and go, whoa, I hope someone got that on tape. But I'd never had this discussion with any of my parents, nor any church ever growing up. And then, I lacked a pack that would say, oh yeah, whoo, you've been disrespected, make sure they lose. No, you've been disrespected. How will we restore your respect? What would a respectable person do that you could walk away feeling proud and go, you know what, I restored respect in a situation where it was missing? And that is how you have to practice in order to become a protector. So, every human being has an inner predator that shows up when we see weakness. So it's pointless to struggle to avoid sexual temptation. Sexual temptation is 99.9% are seeing weakness. We notice opportunity. And we can either be like the dog and the lizard and say, all I know how to do is take advantage of that, or we can look at that and say, there's a weakness, what do I want to do about it? I remember one of my friends drove by a sign one time for one of these gentlemen's clubs. I think it might be a misnomer, but and he looked up at the picture of the young lady on there, and he turned and he said to me, didn't she ever have a dad that bought her little socks and cute outfits and just loved the way that she looked? Why is she missing that in her mind? Why is it that everybody looks at her, doesn't think, oh, why wasn't someone buy her some cute outfits? Let her really enjoy her beauty. Because, you've never built anything that's permanently good if you go to the gentleman's club. But if what we really want is to build something that's, we want some of the good stuff. That's what attracts everybody, and that, she's got the good stuff, I can't get any. How do I get the good stuff? Well, if I be a predator, you're more likely to get on Me Too or whatever that is right now than become a protector under those conditions. See? But our minds don't go there automatically. They just do what the lizard and the dog does. They think about this predator opportunity. Until we begin to think of ourselves as protecting the beauty of everyone in the world. Just another simple example along this line. There was a weather lady arrived at Los Angeles on the weather station when I was there. And when she arrived, she was just the most bubbly, effervescent kind of personality that you ever saw. And she's very young and very bubbly. I said, give her 3 years of exposure in Los Angeles, and she's going to be so jaded that her whole personality on the TV is going to change. And sure enough, within 3 years, she was like all the other people who walk around looking like they're a target for predators. All of that bubbly joy was gone. Now, do we want to be the protectors of bubbly joy? Do we want to have that growing around us? You know, I went diving out in Catalina Island, scuba diving. Dive on one side of the island where almost everybody goes, and the fish will not get close to you. They see you coming. Went diving on the other side of Catalina Island, where the fish almost never see people, and they swam up to me, the same species of fish. They'd come up and they'd look almost right in my mask, like, who are you and what are you doing here? And have I seen anything like you before? You see, when they predator, I got a completely different response. So what we really want to do is to develop a community around us that responds to us as though we're going to be predators? Or do we want to develop a community around us where it's okay to be beautiful? It's okay to have all those things that we find so delightful. Which is the better way to actually have beauty around you all the time? To take advantage of the predator opportunity, or to prove to be a protector for that beauty? And when we think about it, I think most of us go, yeah, I like that psalm that says that, you know, all your daughters are around you like so many palm trees. You know, you're just you're like a park where you live there, all that beauty growing around you. And I think that's what we're trying to do with each other. So we also need to notice, by the way, that greed, which often takes another predatory response, is another way in which this can get out of hand in our lives. And we, again, have to learn as business people how to avoid being greedy while at the same time being very productive in what we're doing. This is another whole area of discussion besides anger and sexuality. So whenever we see weakness, what happens next is what reveals our character. So remember, we'll all notice the weakness. And when we don't have a protective response, we have now discovered a weakness in ourselves. And what happens next will reveal the character of our man pack. Because if our man pack has good character, we'll immediately go, whoa, I found a weakness, let me take it to them and let's find out how we're to be better protectors. If your man pack tends to be predatory, and really quite frankly, Christians can be highly predatory. They'll find a weakness and they'll peck you to death for it. They'll never let it up, never forget what you did. You know, your reputation is done for in that group because you, in fact, showed up with a weakness. Reminds me a little bit of the super chickens, which I'll tell you about quickly, and then we'll do an exercise here. Some breeders trying to research the best way to have chickens. They got the chickens that were the best layers, laid the most eggs. And they separated them from the other chickens, and they did this for 3 generations of chickens. By the end of the 3 generations of chickens, when all the super chickens were put together, they had no egg production at all. And what they discovered was that the super chickens were actually not the best egg layers. They were the most predatory. They pecked all of the other chickens, so that the other chickens discovered they were lower class than they were, and because they were stressed, they didn't lay as many eggs. So as they continued to put the most competitive, the most likely to peck you chickens together, they now pecked each other so much that none of them were laying any eggs by 3 generations of putting them together. So we have to make sure that we don't create super chicken Christians, where the ones that go to the top are the ones that peck everybody else down for all of their flaws and faults. We have to have each other's back. We have to be the kind of place where when we see someone's weakness, we go, oh, that is exactly when they need their man pack around to teach us what do we do with that weakness. So I'll give you one or two quick stories, and while I'm doing this, I want you to think about, when have you ever experienced someone who really had your back? And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to tell the person next to you real quickly the name of that person that had your back, and just a sentence or two about what the context was. So we're not going to tell the whole story, but so I'm going to think of two things. One is, I remember an organization I worked with called Deeper Walk. At the time it was called ICBC, but the leader that was supposed to take over the organization was found to be having sexual relationships with the people he was counseling and with his daughters just before he took over the organization. So what happens typically in an organization, and I've been around a lot of these, is they figure out damage control. How are we going to make sure no one finds out? So, the person resigns and everyone tries to plan. Nothing happened right here. This organization did it differently. They said, wow, if that happened in us, and even to the point where it was the person we had chosen for our next leader, our next international conference should be on that subject. How is it that we haven't dealt with this very well, and how do we deal with it now so that we won't have this continuing to happen around here? And when they looked at their weakness and go, we have a real weakness here, we don't know what it is, but we're going to bring everybody in who has something to offer. We're going to talk about this until we figure out a better way to be this, because we're actually protective people. We're not just trying to protect our reputation. We want a reputation that says when we encounter a problem, we can actually help you with it. And so I have tremendous respect for that because of the kind of response they had to that weakness. In my own life, when I was in high school, pretty socially inept, and didn't really know how to relate to others. There's an older man there by the name of Jim Schreiber who ran the summer fishing program. He would take all the guests fishing out at the Oak Hills camp. Everybody loved Mr. Schreiber, and he looked at me and he says, he never said this out loud, but I could see he thought it. This boy could use a little help. And so he said, would you like to come fishing with me? And I said, oh, yeah, I'll come fishing with you. Next time he said, hey, would you like to fill the gas tank on the outboard motor? I said, yeah, let me show you where that is. So, well, now he said, would you like to get the fishing poles ready for? After about 5 times, he said, there's a lot of people want to go fishing today, and I'm just kind of busy. Would you mind taking them all fishing? And by the end of that summer, I was the most popular person around there. I'd gone from not knowing how to fit in to, because of Mr. Schreiber seeing that weakness and going, I'm going to teach this boy how to have something good to give. He never told me that's what he was doing. I caught him at it. Never resented it. He never spoke to me directly about it, but I knew that Mr. Schreiber had my back. Brought the people in one time. They'd caught some big fish, and they wanted me to fillet them, and I didn't know how. And just then Mr. Schreiber came by and said, let me just do that for you. And, that was the kind of thing. He saw weakness. He did something about it. Would you like to be that kind of person? Has anyone ever done that for you? If that name comes to your mind, tell the person next to you and just, a sentence or two about what it was. Where did this happen? So go ahead and have that conversation, and then we'll do another exercise. All right, let me break in on you here a minute. Tell you another story. It's at the risk of biasing the question I'm about to ask you, because I'm going to ask you to get in groups of about 5 or 6, whoever cluster you can pull together there, and answer the question, what weakness would most men bring to church if they knew that the man pack had their back and would teach them to be protective instead of predatory? So there's a very wide range, and I'm going to pick one topic, and so I don't want it to bias the wide range, but had a church in a major city, and one of the associate pastors had been meeting a woman on a website where married people can meet married people and have affairs. And so she showed up at church with her husband because apparently the affair wasn't going the way she wanted it to. And so the church came to me and said, now what are we going to do about this? We've caught this pastor having an affair. And this was on the verge of wicked, but it was actually what I think they should have been thinking. But what I said to them was, oh, what a wonderful opportunity. I bet the pastor isn't the only person in Los Angeles having an affair. Why don't you invite everybody into your church to show them how you help people make a change and deal with this in their life? And the pastoral staff looked at me like, okay, give us something helpful. Because in fact, they had no answer, right? And it's not unusual for us to have never talked about that. We actually don't have an answer. And so what we do instead, because we just know the super chickens will pick on us, is we keep that out of church. But in business and all kinds of places where we become a little more predatory than we want to, and I don't want us to just think about us, but men, if you want to, so Boulder is now open. We are going to make an invitation to, the top thing, the top 3 things that every man in Boulder would want to have a chance to figure out how to be less predatory and more protective about. What would be the things? And if you could just, kind of figure out what you think would come to the top of the list, the top 3 things as a little group, what that men would like to have help becoming protective about, and it's a place where we're just normally predatory and no one's ever helped us. So, you understand what the question is? All right, so what would you think that would be? We're going to have you get in groups of about 3 to 5, something like that, whatever you can cluster up there. I'm going to give you just about 3 minutes to talk about it, and then I'm going to have your group kind of call out what you thought came to the top of your list. Well, approximately, yeah. Yeah, it's a big ask. Yeah, I think some of these things will come up fast. How many of you in your group would say we would agree with the things that we've heard said so far? So, yeah, look at that. That's pretty much the fleet of us. So, I think we hit the big ones right there that came to mind. I especially like that workplace place, because that's one of the environments where if you can teach yourself and the people around you how to be protective in a place that's normally predatory, you will actually stand out quite remarkably from the people around you. So now the question that's left is, in my mind, because now I go home, will this have been an interesting talk, or are you actually going to create the kind of environment here in Boulder where you will invite men in and people in, because here's a place you can learn to deal with those instead of being predatory, to be protective and become the kind of person that you can be proud of at home, at work, in whatever environment you're in. You don't have to be the best at doing it in the world, but we're people that help solve that problem. And now you've become a very rare commodity. So with that, thank you very much for your time. John, I'll turn it back to you. You can close us out.
Yeah, Jim's book, Rare Leadership, is up here, and I've got copies for our leadership team right after this. So, but yeah, it's a great book. I'm reading it right now, and Jim, thanks so much. This is the pregame show, guys. Jim is going to be with us in October, so mark your calendar now. The first weekend in October 5th through the 7th, and he's going to spend much more time like this, okay? And we also have, if you guys didn't pick this up, Did everyone get a copy of this? Are there more? Who needs one of these? Yeah, pick up one of these. Mark your calendar now. We're going to continue this conversation. What does real masculinity look like? What does it look like, and what does it not look like? This is a big conversation, and I think there's more confusion now than ever before in our culture, in the church, in our culture, everywhere, on what does it mean to be a protector. That real masculinity, the greatest protector that ever lived, that walked the earth, was Jesus of Nazareth. But most men, most Christian men he doesn't come to mind when they think of real masculinity. Jesus is not the one that comes to mind. He just isn't. I've had this conversation for decades with the guys, and Jesus is not the first guy that comes to their mind. That's why they're not an apprentice of Jesus. Most Christian men are not. And so we're challenging those ideas. Those are big ideas. But Brian and myself and a team of other guys, we're going to mark your calendar now, the first Thursday morning in April for 6 mornings in a row. It's going to be early. It's going to cost a little bit, but it's going to be a great conversation we're going to continue to have. I'm forgetting to mention one other thing, and I don't remember. We need about a dozen guys to go right downstairs, help break down the tables and the chairs. And thanks for coming. Oh yeah. At 10:30, the leadership team is going to meet right downstairs as well. Okay, so let's just kind of move down there if you can help break down the room real quick. And Father, we just are grateful to you for this time and this space, and so much we're grateful so much for Jim and how you're showing yourself strong to him, and how he's helping us and so many others understand how we can move in reflecting, experiencing in our lives every day in ways that matter, what it means to be protectors of ourselves and everyone around us. And again, thanks for this time this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.